So before we actually get to building our tile texture, I want to take a moment for those people who've never done one before to just briefly go over exactly how they work. If we take this texture that I built for another project and if we bring it down by 50% and then we make a copy of it, I'm just holding down the Alt key and dragging another copy of that layer. If we look closely, you can see that it's been built in such a way that these edges actually match up perfectly. So, whatever engine you're in, as it tiles it out, these seams, you don't see the seams. This is a relatively straightforward thing to do. The way we build these images is we start with, let's call it the main image. And then once we've done that, in a second step, we offset it and then work on the actual seams in a second step. And this method is good for both photographic textures that you're going to make or painted textures. The technique is exactly the same regardless. So we're going to start with a 2K map. What am I doing? 72. And we'll make our basic map here. Now, I like to work with a master file. And what I'm going to do, and what it allows me to do, we're going to start with our color map. What it allows me to do is to create folders where I can sort of keep layers separate and then actually export PNGs or whatever other kind of file types I need for whatever usage I need for. And the other thing I like to do is I create kind of a bin folder, which will let me, don't want it as part of that. And this bin folder will let me sort of save steps of my workflow. This is a very touchy-feely kind of thing to do, where we're flying by the seat of our pants. We're going to be combining textures to create our own unique texture. And sometimes you go down a road and half an hour later and 200 steps later, you realize that it's not what you wanted. And rather than starting all the way back from zero, by saving interim versions of things in kind of a bin folder down here, you can save yourself a lot of pain. With that being said, let's open up our resources file here. And these are images I literally pulled off of Google. So there's nothing special about them. Obviously, you can take your own pictures. The one thing to keep in mind is the resolution is what's important. You need to have a photo that's going to go beyond your 2K map. I mean, we got 48 pixels here. We can stretch it out by 48 pixels. But if all of a sudden you find yourself stretching maps out, by doubling their size, you may be covering 2K worth of real estate, but you've just dropped your resolution by half or more, whatever you've done. So it really does pay to pick images that are appropriate for your resolution. I'm not going to use all of these. I just provided a menu here of things that I'm going to use a couple of these. And I'm going to pick out the ones I like. So I just, it doesn't really matter which pictures you use here. Even if you tried, you wouldn't be able to reproduce exactly what I'm doing because it literally is probably one of the most touchy-feely things you can do. It's not like Substance Designer where we're putting in numbers and things are just working exactly the same way for everybody. This is you're making some art. So I'm not going to concentrate on anything other than teaching you workflow. And the most important thing, at least on the Photoshop end of building this, is organization. You really want to keep yourself organized. So I'm going to make that just big enough to fit. And then I'm going to pick another one. I like this one. And I'm looking for what I consider interesting shapes. I want to create height maps here because I want to show you guys how to make height maps. So I'm looking for stuff with height to it. In fact, I think I want to kind of make that one the main one that I'm going to use. So I'm going to, no, I think I'll leave it like this. What we're going to do now, one of the other nice things about having these bigger images is that you can actually, you have a lot of stuff you can decide to just use a portion of it, and it gives you plenty of information. For example, let's see, we can use part of this here. Then I'm going to go ahead, again, I'm hitting the Alt button and I'm dragging, and that's going to make a copy. Put it underneath. And I can, now be careful when you're turning these because your light values are going to, your shadow values, I should say, are going to look wonky. For example, if you've turned this upside down, you got to be aware of the photograph itself, and it's going to look really weird if you have this going one way and then have the same image going the other way, and the shadows aren't going to be corresponding for you. But if you turn it a little bit, it's really not going to make a difference. And I'm also trying to use a different part of the image that maybe I haven't used before. So I've got that set down there. I'm going to quickly shut this off. I want to see, I'm not really repeating anything, and I've got, in fact, to make it easier, I can always just bring this down a little bit so I can give myself an idea of the overall image I'm creating. Yeah, that'll work. Now, I'm going to start taking away from this one on top, but I don't want to use the eraser tool because I may change my mind. And that's where layer masks come in. They're very good for that, and they work on a grayscale. So black is completely transparent and white is completely opaque, and all the grayscale values in between. And I now use a brush to start to cut out and move away and remove, rather, the bits that I don't want. So like this. And I want to get that deep part of that deep crack in here. So I'm going to follow that along a little bit. But remember, it's actually, I think it's this one. So I'm going to be really careful not to repeat the image. As it is, I'm going to see what happens if I, now let's see if we can get rid of that stick without having to do too much work. Yeah, that's going to work. I don't want that stick there. And I'm going to come back down here and maybe take out some of this. So I'm already beginning to build something a little bit different. Now we're going to blend these two rocks together. And I've got this little area here, which I'm going to just fix up with a clone tool. I've got this set to all layers, so that should work out. You know, actually, I'm gonna make a new layer, because if I start cloning above areas, if I start cloning in areas where I've already used this layer mask, it's not going to show up. And if I have it set to all layers, I can go a layer above it and just add to it. We're going to just merge all this stuff into one layer anyway. So let's make a bigger brush. So it really doesn't matter. And again, when I'm doing this cloning, I'm painting with the clone tool. And I'm also being very careful as far as not creating any patterns. I have a lot of different shapes and colors here that I can choose from. So I pick a spot, I'll just clone that bit out, and then I'll pick another spot. And so I can kind of draw new bits of rock using that clone tool and just thinking, okay, well, I'd like to see this little piece down here. And then I'm going to attach it, I'm going to finish it off with this little piece down here. And you start painting, literally just adding little bits from one end of the image to other ends of the image. Make that a little bit less yellow. Until you've created something that you like. And that's what I meant about it being super touchy-feely. I don't like what's happening here. This right here is exactly like this right here. So I will get rid of one of them, and I think I'm going to get rid of this one. And, you know, it's the same piece of rock, so it's allowed to be very, very similar, but that's a pattern. And you just want to get rid of those. Because as it is, this is a texture that's going to get repeated over and over again, so you don't need actual repetitions within the texture. These little dots. Actually, you know, I'm not going to worry about it anymore because we are going to overlay this onto this underneath texture. So I'm pretty happy with that as a first layer. I'm going to just merge these guys. And now I like to play this game. If it doesn't work on Macs, it only works on PCs. If you have this highlighted, you can actually use the page down button to scroll through your blends. If you're on a Mac, you actually have to keep using the mouse. And I do this very often. I'll just kind of go down the line and see what I like. Okay, overlay. I kind of like overlay. That looks pretty cool. A soft light. So far, I like overlay the best. Okay, so overlay or soft light. Definitely overlay. Okay. Before we start working on these seams, I do want to show you one more technique where we can also just pick sections of something and then apply that. So I like this texture because it doesn't really hold much color, but it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's just a cool texture that can go with pretty much everything. So we're going to grab this up. I'm going to Control C for copy, and we'll bring it in here. We can resize it. Maybe get some of it like in this area here. And maybe drag it over into that area there, so we can make another copy of this by Alt and dragging, and then we can also resize it and create like another little section down here. We can turn it not too much. Let's not, although this one's kind of shallow, so you could get away with it. And just to make our life easier, we can go ahead and combine these guys. And again, I'm going to add a layer mask. And I'm going to get a brush. I think this time, oh, I have to have the actual brush picked. So I'm going to B for brush. I'm going to pick a fan brush, and let's get some scattering on that. And this will give me a nice fuzzy edge that I can start to sort of cut into those images. And again, if I kind of want to see what I'm doing with the stuff underneath, I can either toggle this on and off, or I can go with the opacity as well. I think I'm going to go that way, at least until I figure out the sort of general area that I want. But it's enough to kind of do this and then bring it all the way back up so you can actually see what you're doing and get a good edge now. And we are going to be blending these, so it's just going to give us kind of an extra texture on top of there. And again, I'm going to turn this off. I kind of want to follow, like inside here I want to do. So I'm going to get rid of this stuff. And because we are using the layer mask tool, you know, it's not the end of the world. If you go over, you can just switch it from painting in black to painting in white. And I just did that by hitting X, and it will reverse the process. So, you know, it's not the end of the world if you mess up. And that's why I like to use the layer mask instead of erasing it, because it's not permanent. Or is that still a straight line here? No, it's actually a line from the rock underneath. Okay, now I'm going to apply this layer mask. So I'm right-clicking, apply layer mask. And we can play the same game now with our blend modes and see what we like. Again, that's overlay. Overlay seems to be working quite well for us. Although I think in this case, I'm liking soft light better. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with soft light. There. So now we have our basic image for our stone. So I'm going to, again, merge these. And I'm going to just, for the sake of it, just get a copy in there so that if I ever, you know, it's an interim copy, and you can make as many of those as you want. What we're going to do now is we are going to do the edges. Now, before we do that, we have to trim the image so that our offset will work properly. The offset is going to offset the entire thing, not just what it sees in the, I don't know if it's actually what they call this layer, but it's just the actual thing that you can see. The image information, it's storing all of this image information even though you can't see it. And when it offsets it, it's going to offset the whole thing. So, for example, so your offset is filter, other, offset. And in here, you set in half of your whole width and height. So my horizontal in a 2K image is 2048, so half of that is 1024. My vertical, again, half of that is 1024. And you'll see how messed up this is because it's taking these giant things, well, at this point it's just one layer, it's taking this giant layer and it's offsetting it by 1024 pixels, which is completely meaningless. So it's important that before we do any offsetting, I'm hitting Control A, and that's going to grab up the entire image, and then image crop. And now, if we go back in and do an offset, we get these clean lines because it's now only looking at these edges, and it's moving each one of those edges by 1024. And now we just repeat the process that we did in the, to make the original image. I'm going to make a copy, so Alt drag. And there's a bunch of different ways we can do this. I mean, they're the same methods. We can make a layer mask, and we can use our brush tool. Oh, you know what? I should have made this copy before I offset it, so I'm going to offset it back again. And now I can use this as a background. So if I come into my layer mask and I start getting rid of stuff, when I erase this seam, it's picking up things underneath, and that looks pretty good right there. But sometimes it doesn't work for you because whatever image is under here isn't going to work for whatever reason with the image you have on top. In that case, you can also use a clone tool. But again, since I've already got a layer mask set in here, I'm going to make a new layer, make sure that I'm picking up all layers. And I can do the same thing here, where I can just blend this in a way that makes sense. Because remember, this is where they meet up. So this is also going to be part of the image. And it needs to fit. It needs to look like things are undulating just as nicely in this image as they are in your previous, like the flip side of it. So you're constantly making decisions about what you're going to keep, what you're not going to keep. And I'm going to take a look at what's going on under here. So I've got this big crack under here, and that's not going to work. So I'm going to come back up into my clone layer, and I'm going to get some of this and maybe fade that in. And again, as I'm doing this, I'm trying to be really careful about not creating patterns. Like here, I've created a pattern. So maybe I'll go to another part of the image where it's similar coloring, and maybe grab something from in there and introduce it a little bit, and maybe bring some of this in. Also maybe change the kind of brush that I'm using. I think that's maybe this one. We'll try that because it's giving me it's a very round edge, but I don't want to use a fan either. I want to use something with a little bit of a sort of fuzzy edge, but not too fuzzy. So yeah, and and I'm allowed to make new shapes here. I just want, when I'm doing that, I just want to make sure that I'm not, again, that I'm not repeating too many things. I'm going to take this and bring it in here. And again, making sure that it all makes sense. And that's really the important part, because we're going to be building our height maps and our other maps and masks off of this original image. And we're going to be imagining heights in through here. So we don't want to kind of do random stuff, because it's going to mess up our height maps. Now I've kind of stopped as I'm coming up to these little sort of points here at the very end. And it's important to treat these areas very, very carefully, because we run the risk of creating brand new seams when we re-offset the image. So, in here in the middle, you can pretty much do what you want. It doesn't really matter. But when you're coming up to these edges, you usually want to go smaller with your brush and just be super careful that you're only really touching just that very spot, and then you're kind of coming away from it, because you will create new seams. I'm going to take a closer look now, and I see a problem here, and that actually looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit more in here. All right. I am going to apply this all together. Before I do that, I'm going to make another copy of this though. And I'm going to merge these guys together. And now I can offset it again. So you can see that it's pretty much the same image, only the corners are now changing, and they will match up with each other now. I do want to check one more time. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Because but you know, sometimes it can't be helped. You have to do it a couple of times to make sure you get rid of all the seams. So you just offset and re-offset. And this then is the color image off of which we can start making all our other maps and masks. One more thing before we finish this video. You can actually very easily make hand painted maps. I mean, I guess this is already technically hand painted. Very often, if I'm doing something really stylized, I'm going to call this photo. Very often, I will make, I'll do filtered versions of these things. So I'll work the photo first, and then I can come into the filter gallery and take a look at what they have as far as filters go. I quite like paint daubs. That usually works well for rocks. But there's so many things you can fool around with in here, and they're a lot of fun. And you can create like painted versions of your material. And you don't have to just run it the one time either. So let's say, for example, we have, we use paint daubs for this first one. Maybe bring the sharpness up a little bit. And I can make another copy. And I can do another filter in here. Again, you pick something that you like. You can mess around with it in these sliders. I can spend hours in here just messing around with the filters. And we can build this one, and then we can combine them using some sort of blend. Looks pretty cool. So you've got like this, now you've got this painted rock, and we can merge these two, and I'll make another copy, and then I'll see what happens if I run this through a filter another time. There's also a bunch of other ones down here. This accented edges one is kind of cool for rocks. This is like, it turns it into a completely different animal. So this is then something, I actually really like this. Okay. And let's compare that to our original rock. Okay, so that's something completely different. That's almost too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here. I'm going to get that original one. And let's see what happens if we start blending this with our original. Whether we can't get an interesting hand-painted look with that. That's kind of cool. Okay, that's screen. I think I like that screen one. That's pretty funky. So we'll keep this, and we'll call this our painted texture. And we're going to combine those two. And we'll get rid of this one. So now we have, oh, I didn't put them in the folder. They belong in this folder. So now we have two color maps that we've created. They're both, let's just double check this painted one, make sure that it tiled correctly. It should be okay. But let's make sure that the offset's good. Because when, filters will sometimes do wacky things. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And right in here, I'm seeing a problem. It pays to check because a filter will move pixels around. And a little bit in here. And maybe a little bit down here. I think that's good. So I'm going to offset it again. And now we're back to our original. So here we have two color maps. And in the next video, we're going to go ahead and start making a height map that we can apply these colors to.